known from the 1960s. That's as much as I know. It's the first time that the sound, I said, oh, where's that? I said, what's wrong?
Oh, So this is, oh, there we go. Okay, we're trying to make the technology work at the last minute, and it may not. So if you have your device with you, what was going to be displayed on the screens is in the handout section of the website. So if you want to get that, you can be able to see it clearly. Okay. Okay, well, but Jeff?
She's inviting people to come closer.
Let me put on the screen what I think needs to be on the screen. Well, I don't want to spend any more time on this because we're now late, right? So I would rather.
Look here. Yeah. For now. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I've got the actual document up on the screen. Okay, it's on people's computers. They can look them up.
But we can't get it on the live stream,
So if we can't get it on the live stream, we can't get it on the live stream. There's always a glitch that doesn't get resolved.
Okay, oh, no, it'll work for a sec.
Right?
Let's try a different jack. It worked for a sec.
Oh, that's because sometimes the jack is.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, 'cause I'm just seeing
there.
round spots.
But what it's also doing is not putting up the document. It's a different screen. Can you work on it from back there and you can get started? And if you can't do it, you can't do it. I'm not going to be uptight about it. It's much better to get started. Okay. All right, let's go.
So, I don't know, can you hear me?
Not yet.
Can you hear me now?
Not much better.
Better? Okay. So, Daniel, Reb Daniel, I want to speak to you not as an individual, but for the B'nai or Boston community that you and Hannah led for 7 years.
Can you speak to us closer to the mic?
How- Well, we collectively received your teachings, your gentle way of leading us into a much deeper davening, your humor, especially at Purim, with a bottle of vodka in your hand, your mentoring of so many of us, learning High Holiday Nusach and pastoral rituals around your dining room table. And most significantly, the way you brought forward the wisdom of your teachers, and specifically Reb Zalman. For many of us at B'nai Or who were not in that first generation of Musmachim of Reb Zalman, you became and still remain B'nai Or's Rebbe. In many ways, we are your lineage. I do not say that lightly, and I imagine it is hard for you to absorb. You took a raggedy, folk singing, spiritual once a month, not too big on Hebrew or a lot of words, on a journey that brought not only me to this place as a rabbi, but inspired and encouraged by you and Hanna to find our own deployment. When 6 of us B'nai Orniks arrived en masse at DLTI 2, I'm not sure Marcia and Sean knew what they were getting in for. Today, Shandel Khan is the Rabbinic Community Chaplain of Sarasota Jewish Family and Children's Services. Janie Hodgetts serves as Spiritual Director and was the chaplain at Mass General Boston NICU unit. Chazan Chulamet Fagan is the music director. Wise Fairman is music director of Kahila in California. Dr. Daniel Sheff is founder and spiritual leader of the Hanani Jewish community in Massachusetts. Esher Chazon Matya Angelou is a practicing spiritual director, rabbinic pastor, and chaplain. And I, Rabbi Melissa Starr-Wenig, in retirement, continue to find my love of the new seekers to be my calling. Others from B'nai Or have also found their deployment. Daniel, you were so beloved by B'nai Or that we organized a campaign called Tequila and Tequila to entice you to come lead us at high holidays after you have left Boston. Do you still have that bottle? I'm not sure what can be more of an honor than to be beloved by so many people. Thank you, Daniel, for taking me and so many of us on this amazing journey. You are and will remain our Rebbe.
We'll talk about that later. In Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, verse 7, Joshua ben Prachia would say, appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor. Reb Daniel is that teacher for me. I will not forget the week with you, Reb Daniel, on Hornby Island, studying Talmud, nor your conducting such a beautiful ceremony, installing me as my community's renewal rabbi. Your gentle manner and thoughtful approach to renewing Yiddishkeit has been a continuing inspiration to me all these years. Your legacy is a credit to Reb Zalman and Renewal, and has been captured in your collaboration with Reb Zalman on such works as Integral Halakah and Credo of a Modern Kabbalist. You founded the Integral Halakha Institute, Aleph Canada, or Shalom in Vancouver with Hanna, and so much more. Reb Daniel, you have given so much to the renewal movement, personally touching so many of us. You have done much to ensure that renewal has continued, and please God, will continue to thrive through the decades. And so today, we honor one of our most influential Rebbes. It gives me enormous pleasure to announce the establishment of a fund to honor Reb Daniel's legacies, contributions, and your ongoing work. This fund will provide a way for Renewal to give back to Reb Daniel, honoring his life's work. The fund has been seeded with a generous pledge from the Bera Sturmwind families in memory of Denise Sturmwind, nee Bera, of blessed memory. It feels so important to show that we care for you, as you have cared tirelessly for us over so many years. And we encourage everyone to consider support for this fund. Further details will be made public as they become available. Reb Daniel, kol hakavod. May you go from strength to strength. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek.
Gotta love technology. For God's sake. הרב דניאל, מורי ורבי, קטונתי מכל החסדים ומכל האמת שעשית עמי. One can speak volumes about all your contributions to the Jewish Renewal world, your many students, and all your accomplishments. Others have already spoken and will continue to speak, obviously, about your unique blend of Halakah and Hasidus, but backwards compatibility, and perhaps most of all, your deep commitment to the deployment you received from your own Rebbe, Reb Zalman alav shalom. I want to mention several little things that remained with me, that I tried to carry forward in my rabbinate, things that you can only learn by spending precious time with your beloved teacher. One of the things that I learned from you is that one need not be apologetic about either your religiosity or your flexibility. You were the first liberal rabbi I met that really talked about God without any disclaimers or reservations. I still cannot express how liberating that felt. On the other hand, you're equally committed to the idea that Halakha has always been more flexible and more interesting than some would like us to think. And, as you once told me, we can prove it. Another bit that I learned from you is to not let ideology stand in the way of your values. To call out injustice when you see it, and that there is no text, no movement, and no person, no matter how much Torah you learn from them, who are immune to scrutiny. Nevertheless, if I had to choose one thing that you taught me, one thing that I will try and carry forward throughout the rest of my life, is your enormous pride and respect for not only your teachers, but also your students. The fact that you always give credit to your students and freely admit that you learn with them as well as from them, this is what makes you my Rav and my Rebbe. And this is what makes you a Rebbe for so many people in this room. Thank you. Toda rabah.
Thank you, Warren. Birshut Mori. When I was asked to choose a director of studies, I set my sights on you, Reb Daniel, because you reminded me in certain comforting ways of my father, Avi Mori. And I invited you to take a walk, at the end of which I proposed, "Will you be my das?" It turned out to be a prescient arrangement because you only counseled Canadians. Who knew that I would become Rabbi of Or Shalom? But what better ground to tend than that which Rebs Daniel and Hanna so consciously seeded. I find that my appreciations of Reb Daniel feel incredibly personal, but this audience will understand that for each gift my teacher gave to me in a manner that suited me and challenged me, many of you received perfect gifts of guidance suited to you and no other. Thank you, my teacher, for singing long rivers of Zmira with me, no books in hand, and in the archaic melodies that were evocative to both of us. In this way, you shared a certain sensibility I could step into with trust. Thank you, my teacher, for allowing our Hasidic masters to have a voice in my own halachic writing. This made it possible for me to reflect with my fullest self, my fullest mind. Thank you for surprising me by inviting me to become a Dayan Davka because you wanted to welcome an artist's perspective. Most of all, thank you for empowering me to pull my humble chair up to the table of Pilpul. Your principal teaching that there is no such thing as the Halakah. Rather, many paths of wisdom and practice has held and empowered me every day of my rabbinate, making it possible for me to paskin with dignity, the dignity of a Mara Da'atra. May your legacy be strong and long.
I am honored to stand here today, especially as someone who applied to the AOP in the year after Reb Zalman's death, and a time when Reb Daniel was beginning to step back from active leadership within the program. Understanding full well how blessed I am to have been able to develop the relationship with him that I have in the 8 years since. Let us all take a moment to look around in acknowledgement and appreciation of this holy chevra that we are blessed to be part of. I invite us to look up here at Reb Daniel, he's sitting right here, and understand that truly, truly, none of this would be possible without him. To share a reflection that he and Reb Zalman shared with each other years ago. In that auspicious moment of smicha, 50 years ago, Reb Zalman made Reb Daniel a rabbi, and eventually one of our beloved rabbis. But Reb Daniel made it possible for Reb Zalman to become a rebbe. And thus began the begats of our branch of Chassidut, through each one of us, to the celebration, the beautiful celebration on Sunday, and to those who will come long after we are gone. Our shalshelet is long, wide, twisty at times, and yet a chain a mile long is useless without a clasp holding it together. That is what Reb Daniel is for us. And so, Reb Daniel, I thank you, and I bless you to stand up for a moment, if you will, and really, too, to look out and see the love and kavod beaming at you from your students, your colleagues, your friends, and to really see it, and really, like, Hashavota el avavecha, taking it back with you all the way to your beautiful piece of Gan Eden on Hornby Island. May it serve to nurture and nourish the garden of your land and the garden of your neshama for many years to come. Amen.
That's actually another niggin, but we'll come back to it. So I'd like to begin with some embodiment, which will later be reflected in.
You really can't do it without the mic.
Okay. But I need my hands. Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi Daniel. I want to begin with some embodiment, which is part of my practice, which will be reflected again in Reb Daniel's shiur. So this is the Yud He Vav He Shekhinah embodiment, which helps us to realize the divine imprint in our physical body. So invite those who are able to stand and willing to stand, and this can also be done seated. We stand at Sinai Mountain, our feet rooted in the earth, our spine extended, our shoulders rolled back, our neck elongated, and our keter connected to the highest heights. On the exhale, we empty the yud of the head to make space. On the inhale, our arms rise up from our shoulders, the upper hay, reaching toward heaven. On the exhale, the spine, which is supple and is our vav, bends forward and reaches towards Mother Earth. And the hay of the earth and our legs and pelvis, we bend our knees, and from the strength and the power of the earth and our legs, we reach up to heaven. We step to the left and open our arms and find the shin of Shekhinah as also part of our imprint. One more time. Standing at Sinai, connecting heaven and earth, emptying, breathing out the yud of the head. Inhale, lifting the shoulders, the arms upward, the upper hay, towards the highest heights. Exhale, the vav, the spine, supple, connecting heaven and earth. And then bending the knees, feeling rooted in Mama Gaia and lifting up from the strength of our legs and our pelvis. Touching heaven and opening to her presence. And bringing her into our heart always. Thank you. So here's the niggin with the words. Imata mamin, imata mamin, sheyecholin lekalkel. Imata mamin, imata mamin, sheyecholin lekalkel. Ta'amin,
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 sheyecholin
sheyecholim,
letaken.
letaken,
Ta'amin,
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 sheyecholin letaken. Imata mamin, imata mamin, sheyecholin lekalkel. Imata mamin, imata mamin, sheyecholin lekalkel. Ta'amin,
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 sheyecholin
sheyecholim,
letaken.
letaken,
Ta'amin,
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 sheyecholin letaken. Last part, the two parts are come back down to earth together. Imata mamin, imata mamin, sheyecholin lekalkel. Imata mamin, imata mamin, sheyecholin lekalkel. Ta'amin,
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 sheyecholin
sheyecholim,
letaken.
letaken,
Ta'amin,
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 sheyecholin letaken. So if the pictures were working, you would have the words, and also that it's from Rabbi Zalman, Rabbi Nachman, a Torah that says, if you believe that you can mess things up, then also believe that you can repair them. Woo. There you go. He repaired it. This is a brief history of the rabbi we are honoring today and of our journey together to create a movement to renew Judaism. I share this especially for those who do not know us, to catch a glimpse of the early days of Jewish Renewal. 50 years is a long time, with many opportunities to learn, experiment, and make mistakes on a path without a manual. It was trial and error, or trial by error, until Tikkun, repair, became a way of life. I gave Daniel the title Baal Tikkun, Master of Repair. He was known in our family for the repair of toaster ovens, door hinges, light fixtures, clogged toilets, etc. For him, this was born out of a perception that he broke everything he touched. He turned that negativity into the curiosity to learn how something worked, often by simply taking it apart and putting it back together, hopefully without any missing screws. And if our kids are watching, I'm sure they're laughing. And He became a master at repairing the broken hearts of those who came to him for reassurance, comfort, and support. Daniel Israel Zorach Siegel was the son of Canadian-born David Isser Halevi, a teacher, synagogue executive director, and wannabe rabbi, who instilled in Daniel the importance of service. David's mother, Ida Siegel, was an early feminist in the Toronto Jewish community. This is like in the early 1900s. Daniel's mother, Hadassah Ada Steinberg, who spoke 5 languages, was born in Moscow, was a writer and correspondent for the Canadian Broadcasting Company at the UN. Born in Moscow to Nechama Esselson and Yitzchak Nachman Steinberg, an Orthodox lawyer who served as People's Commissar of Justice in Lenin's left social revolutionary cabinet. From Russia to Germany to London, they moved just in time. Yud Nun had a plan to settle the Jews in Australia. Ada worked closely with her father until she died of cancer in 1956. Religious observance and radical courage came through that line. 9-year-old Danny and his 7-year-old sister Esther were left to make sense of their fragmented family heritage, and they did. Daniel and I met in 1967 at a Yom Kippur breakfast where we listened to the Beatles' newly released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We married in 1969 in the garden of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College on Broad Street in Philly, where he was in the first class. From the beginning, we were renewing Judaism. We were both Holocaust incarnates, as were many in our first cohort. We felt called to devote our lives to community building and kiruv, gathering the sparks and drawing people close to godliness. In 1971, the mantra was, turn on, tune in, and drop out. We left Philadelphia in our painted VW van, a yin-yang symbol painted in primary colors on one side and an Om on the other. We headed west across the US and then to Canada, settling for a year in Winlaw, British Columbia, north of Spokane. There we learned to chop wood, milk cows, plant gardens, live in harmony with the seasons, and dwell together communally. It informed and transformed our lives to be intimately connected to the earth. 2 weeks before the birth of Noach, on June 30th, 1972, our little shack burned to the ground while I was canning strawberries on a wood stove. By the grace of God, our past lives were consumed, but we were unharmed. We had nothing left but the clothes we were wearing and 4 dozen freshly laundered diapers, which I grabbed when I heard the crackle on the roof. Do we have an, oh, okay, the photo of Zalman and Daniel. There you go. This was taken by my sister. In August 1972, Daniel hitchhiked 1,500 miles to Winnipeg and back. Reb Zalman was a Rebbe looking for a chassid, and Daniel became his first Musmach. He sent us out into the world to plant seeds of Jewish renewal. Our first stop was Shari Shemaim Synagogue in Thunder Bay, Ontario, where they required us to be Orthodox, even though the congregants were not. Every 6 weeks, we drove 500 miles to learn with Reb Zalman in Winnipeg. Daniel had the skills, he just needed an upgrade. Zalman gave him the Ramchal's Mesilat Yesharim and then the Hasidic masters. Finally, Daniel found God in the sources after all those years of unorthodox day school education. And he completed Zalman's basic curriculum to learn Mila, circumcision, Shrita, to shochet, and sofrut, to write as a scribe. In January 1974, we gathered in the basement of Rabbi Neal and Carol Rose's home, and Reb Zalman anointed Daniel and our whole mishpacha at the time, including 2-year-old Noach and Shefa in my belly. He crafted a letraset smicha document, which is the next slide, which was the technology of the time before computers. Next stop was Victoria, BC, home of the newlywed and nearly dead. Our radical innovation was to invite women onto the bima every other week, which stood for many, many years until the rabbi who followed us and became a good friend couldn't understand why this existed. It actually existed because there were older women in the community who did not want women to be called up to the bima. We also hosted a monthly Shabbat potluck dinner to bring children into the shul. Then off to Philly for a year to live with Zalman and Ilana. We managed the Emlyn Street house where countless seekers passed through for classes and Shabbat. Daniel created the structure for what would eventually become B'nai Or. He drove Zalman around in Beryl, precursor to the modern SUV, learning on the go. Anybody here remember Beryl? Barry does. He received 2 more signatures on his document from Rabbi Arthur Green and Rabbi Meir Fund. Reb Zalman's original idea was to have each denomination represented. On his smicha, yes. We brought the inspiration of the Chabura movement and the Germantown Jewish Center to create a shul in Vancouver, now known as Or Shalom. It was a mom-pop operation where we modeled the dance of the divine feminine and masculine. There we worked and played, built community, and experienced the growing pains of introducing Jewish renewal to a conservative, small C Canadian Jewish world. Daniel's main income was as Hillel director at UBC, the University of British Columbia. Our 3rd son, Elisha, was born there. In 1987, after 10 years, we sadly left friends who had become our spiritual family and headed to Dartmouth College, where Daniel was the rabbi at the Ecumenical Tucker Foundation and the Upper Valley Jewish community. For me, it was a throwback to the patriarchy of the 50s after the creative spirit of the West Coast. Daniel was instrumental in building the synagogue for the community, and I found my voice teacher. Then to Boston in 1987 to serve B'nai Or and begin work as Alepht's first executive director. As the AOP evolved, Daniel became the Halakah guy on the VOD. He had the skills to navigate texts and go deep, even though Hasidus and mysticism had become his love. So he taught the halachic process through Hasidic eyes and made a seemingly dry subject accessible. He co-authored Integral Halakha with Reb Zalman, as well as Credo of a Modern Kabbalist, and many other helpful manuals. There were 2 books Daniel wanted to write, but instead he lived them. the mysticism of everyday life, and working class rabbi. We were not wealthy, often poor, earning a living by the grace of God. This was not a linear trek, but an up and down, high and low, spiraling odyssey of trailblazers in a hands-on, learn-as-you-go rabbinate. In 2005, it was full circle back to the land on a tiny island in British Columbia to live in harmony with Ima Adama and serve the local island community. We didn't travel this path alone. There are several others in this room today who were our co-conspirators. It was happening simultaneously in many places. We all heard the call and were guided to create loving, egalitarian, liturgically alive, ethically responsive Jewish communities. It's hard to believe that we are now the elders. We are grateful to those with whom we have shared this journey, and also to our students and the students of our students who are expanding the vision to meet the needs of this time. May we all be blessed to be channels of light, love, and peace. So I want to invite my co-conspirator, Eshet Chazon, Rav Eshet Chazon, Shana Husbands-Hankin, to come up and share with you a very special ritual.
Second. As shared pathfinders and trailblazers, part of our journey was creative manifestation in many worlds. And this beautiful Simcha cup, Daniel's recognizing it here, has been part of our shared journey for almost 50 years. It began as a gift at our wedding of the stones for Yitzhak and myself, and was crafted by Shira Cronenberg into this beautiful silver goblet as a blessing cup. It's traveled to hundreds of different simchas around the world, and lived in Canada with Daniel and Hanna for several years, and currently resides at our house. So it felt like this was the moment that it was made for. So we wanted to offer it to you today, Reb Daniel. So let's together make a shehachianu. Come.
Baruch atah ya Eloheinu ruach haolam shehachiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh l'chayim. Amen.
Siman Tov and
Mazel
Mazel
tov.
No, I don't want this to get out of hand. We got to keep moving it.
Just relax.
Huh?
Just relax.
You want to keep the cup up here?
Yehelanu, Yehelanu, Ulachol Yisrael. Yehelanu,
Thank you.
Yehelanu, Ulachol Yisrael. Yehelanu, Yehelanu, Ulachol Yisrael. Yehelanu, Yehelanu, Ulachol Yisrael. And now I offer the mic to the man who is known as Abba, Saba, climate activist, gardener of sacred plant medicine. Those Hamevin Yavin.
I just got it.
Community builder, mentor, Reb Daniel, and Baal Tikkun.
This is not going to work. Okay. Vihi Noam Adonai Eloheinu Aleinu Vihi Noam Adonai Eloheinu Aleinu Umasei Yadeinu Konen Aleinu Umasei Yadeinu Konenehu. May the beauty of God rest on us. May God establish the works of our hands. May the works of our hands establish God. Rabbi Bert Jacobson's translation. Hineni he'ani mimaz. I need to begin by saying that I'm conscious of a disconnect in my life. In addition to the baggage I carried unconsciously into my adulthood, and my mistaken conception of how easy it would be to overcome the obstacles that baggage represented, the calling to renew Judaism spiritually brought with it its own lessons and difficulties. Despite our North American belief that success leads to reward, my life and the lives of my partner and sons didn't get easier as a result of success. Like the text I will cite in a few minutes, I continue with an ongoing cheshbon hanefesh of the costs as well as the benefits of the path I chose. Reconciliation, being at peace, is something which comes and goes, and because I know that so many of us also know this disconnect, I'm putting it on the table at the outset. I'm grateful to the Holy One of Blessing for allowing a soul as imperfect as mine to do some good in the world. It is true that I am, in a sense, Reb Zalman's Bechor, not his biological Bechor that belongs to Shalom, my brother. Yet being the first is not the same as being the best. It's just the first. By being willing to be what turned out to be the first recipient among many, I helped open the doors to leadership, scholarship, and a renewal of Jewish spirituality after the Holocaust and its challenges to faith. And more, many of you who have followed me and created this lineage are people whose gifts far surpass mine. Whatever follows in this hour you have given me is not Hannah's and my story alone so much as it is all of ours. And at the outset, I want to acknowledge my mentors, my friends in this endeavor at Renewal, who are too many to name, and who know who you are. And in particular, two people, one of whom you know, and the other most of you never met. Everything that you think I may have done happened only because of my life partner, my spiritual partner, Rabbi Hanna Tiferet. Each of us opened the other, and together we teamed to build community and add to the liturgical and musical storehouse of our people. The other is my dad, David Isser, whom Hannah already mentioned. It is he who convinced our rabbi at the time, Simon Glustrom, also a very kind soul, that there was a market for a shorter high holiday service with no assigned seats, where families could sit together, which was not possible at that time when the shul was so big. And so I began my career, as it were, when I was a third-year college student, creating and leading these services. What follows now is excerpts from what might be the beginning of a spiritual autobiography. I illustrate the past with teachings from a sefer I only learned about 2 years ago. Yet, had I known of it then, I think it would have informed my life and direction, which I now read as a path taken as though I had known this Rebbe back then. The vehicle for the first 3 parts of this shiur is the sefer called Ma'or Vashemesh, to which I was led by his great-grandson, whom we know as the Piasetzner. The other, for the last part of this shiur, is one which we all know at least about, and that is Likutei Maharan. Last before beginning, Rebbe Lees first noticed that 2024 marks 50 years since Reb Zalman gave me and I received his first semicha, and that we should mark the occasion. Way back last August, we envisioned this as a moment of celebration punctuated by some connection to the purpose of this plenary session, which I proposed many years ago as a moment for our senior rabbinical students to share the tshuvot that they had written for my class. How the world has changed since last August. I've kept pretty quiet since the 7th of October. First, because I'm not the fastest thinker, and I need time to sort through my reactions and feelings, especially when the data keep changing on a daily basis. I don't know how this is for most of you, but I frequently regret my first, usually emotionally intense reactions to powerful events, and end up having to apologize and rebuild bridges. Second, I've had a difficult time understanding what I, living as remotely as I do, and basically retired from active institutional Jewish life, have to offer. And third, because so many people I admire and whose words I have been following say what I feel so much more eloquently than I can. I continue to be moved by, among others, Rabbis David Ingber, Sharon Brous, Amy Grossblatt Pesach, Fred Gutman, Simcha Daniel, Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum, who would be my rabbi were I to move to Jerusalem, my old friend Debbie Weissman, and my chavruta of 7 years, Tehila Sultana Schaefer, and especially including those of you who have opened your hearts to the rest of us with your poems, your fears, and your thoughts. I want to be clear that my concern today is for you, for us. It is about who we are and need to be, as best as I can see in today's world. Yesterday we heard from Reb Laura, and tonight there will be another opportunity to share around the Middle East, as far as I understand it. This morning I want to use this precious time to focus on our story and our values and how we conduct ourselves. And of course, ultimately it's divided into 4 parts. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, including the Sfirot within. So part 1, the Yud, Keter. From what I hear and see, we are dealing with 2 significant challenges which I would like to address. The first is internal to us, namely the meaning of what it is to be a Rebbe. Does Jewish Renewal have only one Rebbe? And what is the place of a Rebbe for each of us, both as givers and receivers? For all of October and into November, I felt adrift in a way similar to that which I was feeling more than 50 years ago. In 1971-72, as Hanna described to you, we were living in the Slocan Valley in the interior of British Columbia. I knew I needed a spiritual path and was exploring various options. But I kept wondering why, if God was supposed to be so gracious and good, why had I endured years of Orthodox day school, which left me with an oppressive Shulchan Aruch-driven Judaism? It was then that I remembered my earliest encounters with Reb Zalman, back when I was a camper at Camp Ramah in Connecticut, and again when I was a first-year rabbinical student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. A friend invited me up to Boston and took me to the newly starting Chavarat Shalom, where I listened to Reb Zalman be the Shaliach Tzibur for Shabbat Shacharit. I remembered his gentle Birkat HaMazon, the way he sang El Adon to Don Adona, both of which you can find, for those of you who have been asking me, you can find it in my blog on January 1st, 2013 on the Olive Canada website. So I don't know what we're showing on the screens, but the first teaching, I'll just assume that you either see them or can't see them, whatever, it'll be okay. And if you have your, your devices. You can take a look. So the first teaching comes from Vayeshev in the Maor Vashemesh. He says, "Dihine matzanu b'Yisrael kama minei tzadikim kol echad lefi ma'alato." We find in Israel many different kinds of tzadikim, each one with his or her own characteristics. Mala is more than a characteristic, right? It's a positive, right? What's that? Attribute. That would work. Thank you. There are those who have really good qualities. There are those who are real scholars. There are those who are really good at community work and giving. And every one of to every one of these is drawn some kind of association of people who are also masters in their fields and want to learn from this person. They want to learn from the behavior of this person and repair themselves. So he says that the most important thing is to remember to connect to a tzaddik who has the capability of tying together and healing the souls of Israel. I had no doubt at the time, if I had known this text at the time, that Reb Zalman was such a tzaddik. Regardless of whether I wanted to imitate his lifestyle, he was able to do a tikkun on my soul. He saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. He said that he liked me because I knew how to get around. And in spite of having hitchhiked 1,500 miles to see him, and 1,500 miles back, I added that in parentheses too, back to where we were living at the time, all with almost no money, my self-image was of someone who broke whatever he touched. And once he told me that, I watched as I learned, as Hanna said, to take things apart and put them back together again, at least making them no worse than they were when I started. I knew that Judaism needed some kind of what we now call renewal. Indeed, I had already begun, but I had nearly given up and judged myself a failure. A text goes on. Amnam, ech neda hadavar mihu b'madregat tzadik shelemala shemakasher et hakol. Well, okay, so how do we know, how do we recognize such a tzaddik, right, who has connections to the supernal and can help bind us together and repair our souls individually and collectively? And he says, Yesh shnei simanim badavar. So there's two ways you can tell. One is that everybody has, most tzaddikim have a particular one of the sfirot that draws to them, that identifies them. But this kind of tzaddik that we're talking about doesn't have that. That is, at best you might say, yesod, which is to say, that tzaddik is simply the one who can channel all the energy, all the different energies, in through yesod, through that person, into malchut, where it becomes helpful to people. So that's one way you know. That person also, this is still number one, right, says that person doesn't think of him or herself as being particularly special, right? So that's one thing. The second one is lahalhiv et lev hamitchabrim elav. The tzaddik of that quality lights your soul on fire. That's what happens. So Reb Zalman didn't focus on himself, but gave to us the beginnings of the tools we each needed to pursue our callings, our deployments. In one of our early conversations, Hanna told him that she was a flautist and that her expensive Haynes flute had melted in the house fire we had just before our son Noach was born. He immediately responded that she couldn't be without music and gave her enough money to buy an inexpensive flute to tide her over until we got back on our feet and she could afford something better. And once I became the rabbi in Thunder Bay, Ontario, about 450 miles east of Winnipeg, he would send us cassette recordings of his classes in Winnipeg. Imagine that, just how the technology has changed. He would record a cassette, put it in an envelope, right, with a stamp on it, and mail it to us, so we could hear it like a week later. But we didn't have anything to play these cassettes on. So he took me out, and we bought a small cassette player and a speaker. And then he showed me how to take apart the cassette player, solder the external speaker to the inside of the recorder so we could listen to the classes with decent sound. You see where I get it from. In 1972, I had hitchhiked from the interior of BC to meet with Reb Zalman and talk over the possibility of learning with him. It was because of his generosity and support that I decided to stay with him, even if that meant working in the Jewish community. That was his price. I told him, I'm happy to drive a cab, Zalman. He said, no, you want to learn with me? you got to work in the community. Becoming a rabbi was not my goal. Becoming a serious practitioner was, and I was willing to pay his price for that opportunity. Reb Zalman then gave me access to a whole part of Jewish tradition that even with 12 years of yeshiva, I didn't even know existed. From a manual like Mesilat Yesharim, to the Tanya, to recordings of his Winnipeg classes, to the journal he had me keep, to learning how to live with my mistakes. All these were part of his gifts to me during those years. And let me be clear, he never expected unquestioning loyalty. He never assumed that he always knew the right answer. There was an early occasion like that because the custom in Thunder Bay was to overpay the rabbi for Hanukkah candles. I would get them at about 50 cents a box, and they would pay me between $5 and $10 a box. And that was one of their ways of helping the rabbi make ends meet, because they didn't offer a salary that made ends meet. I was very troubled by that. I didn't like it. I didn't like the thing. So I asked Reb Zalman, what do you think I should do? He said, why don't you go and deliver the Hanukkah candles? I thought, okay, that's a good idea. So I went and delivered them, and I realized that I was delivering Hanukkah candles to homes I had no idea whether they wanted them or not. I had no idea whether they saw this as a good gesture. And I was really shaken by that. And I went back to him and I said, you know, this is what happened. He said, oh, that's too bad. You know, next year you could do it this way. That was a really very profound lesson, especially to somebody who agonizes over all of his mistakes. It seems that most of what I hear these days is critiques of how it appears that some of us seem to follow Reb Zalman as their Rebbe, and to some degree of Reb Zalman himself as a Rebbe. To a large degree, I believe that this criticism assumes that the Rebbe model, which Reb Zalman did know best, and maybe even wanted for himself, namely that of Chabad's 7-generation dynasty, is what being a Rebbe means to everyone all the time. However, as I hope we'll see from the text I've selected for this shiur, Chabad is only one possibility, and in my humble opinion, that of the Ma'or Vashemesh represents another model which is not focused on devotion to a Rebbe and much more on the responsibility of a tzaddik to help the chassid grow spiritually. And by the way, the Ma'or Vashemesh, as far as I know, does not use the word Rebbe at all, anywhere in the book. So ultimately, that is the model that Reb Zalman embraced and did his best to actualize. I think that the question is more about what does it mean to be a Rebbe or a tzaddik. So first of all, Reb Zalman would say that a Rebbe is not who you become as a person, it's a function you serve when called upon. The next question is, what does a Rebbe do for the chassid? And I think that that also is something that we misunderstand. If we go to the Ma'or Vashemesh, we see that he's saying that the function of a tzaddik is to help the person who comes, who sees in this person a channel that they can open in order to help that person achieve the level that they're supposed to get to and that they can get to. And a rabbi who is self-serving, who needs to be right, who claims to know the seeker better than the seeker knows oneself, is suspect. There is a kind of discernment that we have to use as seekers, and there is also a kind of humility that we need to cultivate as Klei Kodesh. If you're not just as happy sitting in the congregation and davening as you are standing in front of everybody or sitting at the center of the circle and leading, then you need to practice being as open and receptive to what another has to offer as much as you might want others to be towards what you have to offer. People periodically come to me and say, what do I know that Reb Zalman said about this or that subject? That's because I'll talk about it later. I think that that's often not the right question. It's more about what was Reb Zalman trying to get across? What was the method that he was suggesting, and how can we apply that method to the situations in which we find ourselves? But to think that Reb Zalman anticipated every question is to look at the concept of Rebbe in a way which is not really helpful. Reb Zalman certainly aroused in me a way of loving the Holy One of Blessing. He pointed me to the spiritual literature of Judaism and to see the practice of mitzvot and study as our spiritual path. But did I go and try to emulate or copy the way he did it? could I possibly have? Look at how small I am compared to him. You know, it's not possible. But I did go and try to emulate but the answer is no, right? I did not try to copy his behavior. I didn't. I followed what he was teaching me in the way that worked for me and with his encouragement that was constant. The Maor Vashemesh says, "Hatzadik asher ba'ir machmat shehu mitnaheg et atzmo b'midat ha'emet uv'chol hamidot b'kedusha v'tahara v'docheh hashiflut al yedei zeh me'orer et b'nei iro v'hamedabkim bo u'miyasher levavam shelo yihiyeh b'neihem kin'ah v'sin'ah v'tacharut rak shekol echad yodeh lechavero al ha'emet v'shelo yirtzeh echad lenatzeach et chavero behevlei hazman." Paraphrasing it, this tzaddik who is it there? So this tzaddik, right, who by conducting him or herself in a righteous way, arouses in the people who come to this tzaddik so that they will not be jealous, angry, or bitter with each other. That everyone will acknowledge the truth in what the others are saying, and no one will try to defeat another in matters of argument. The test of being a Rebbe is in the results. So one of the results that we know is if your people get along with each other, you got something to say for yourself. And if all you want is to defend yourself and what you have to say, then you need to take a look at it very carefully. So the hey now of Chachma and Bina, transcending and including, gathering experience and perhaps a little bit of wisdom at the same time. At the end of our school year of living with Reb Zalman and Ilana, we had a choice to make. I could stay in Philadelphia and be Reb Zalman's secretary, handyman, chauffeur. Or, as I sometimes put it, I could make my life's work being Nasan to Reb Zalman's Nachman. Or do I take what I had learned and bring it to people to see if they responded to a newly renewed Jewish spirituality, like several of the first generation of Hasidic Rebbes did with what they had learned from the Besht and the Maggid of Mezrich? Only now, and again, only because Elise set this moment in motion, did I start thinking about what it meant to receive smicha from Reb Zalman. I've always thought that he was the active one and I was passive. What I realize is that being willing to receive the smicha established the relationship, the connection, and the possibility of beginning a lineage. The way Reb Zalman often put it was there was no such thing as a Rebbe without a Chassid, nor a Chassid without a Rebbe. He told this story frequently. There is a wonderful story about the man who came to the Kotzker and said to him, "Rebbe, my father came to me in my dream and told me I should be a Rebbe for 300 people." And the Kotzker laughed. The man said, "Well, what's the joke?" The Kotzker said, "If your father would have come to 300 people and told them that you were to be their Rebbe, I would take it seriously. That you had a dream to be a Rebbe, I don't take so seriously." And in a sense, one could laugh all of us out of this place with that attitude. So I've been noticing to be very cautious about saying I'm training to be a leader. You only become a leader when you're leading someone, right? When you're helping someone else. And by the way, if you prepare yourself to that and it doesn't happen, so what? You've become a very good person, right? So it's a no-lose, right? Or a win-win. I took it as a responsibility to bring honor to Reb Zalman's smicha, especially at a time in his life and in Canadian Jewish life where his reputation was not what it became. And so I chose to carry what I had learned from him out into community and synagogue life to see what would happen. The Maor Vashemesh, citing that moment in Vayishlach where Yaakov gets left alone and wrestles with this being, right? And the being sees that it cannot defeat Yaakov. And this is the way the Maor Vashemesh wants to understand it. He says, "Dihine al kol be asara shchin tasharya." In Sanhedrin it says, every time there are 10 people together, that's when the Shekhinah is present. I have to just proceed as though I'm assuming you can see or not see, but anyway. Biki barov am hadrat melech, right? Quoting from Proverbs, the glory of the king is in the multitude of the people. And he says, "V'chol davar shebikdusha yoter tov la'asot ba'aguda me la'asot yichidi." Right? All things that are done bikdusha have to be done in a minyan, right? You know what those are: Baruch Hu, kedusha, right? Have to be done. Kaddish, right? To say v'imru amen, right? Say ye amen. There has to be a minyan there, right? Because who's saying it? Right? Which, by the way, is why, because we do mourners Kaddish all together, I like to stand right next to somebody who's saying Kaddish, listen to their Kaddish and answer amen to them, right? To that person, right? Because in a big group, who's the one who's leading, right? No one is actually leading. Okay, it's a practice I really like, and I'd like to pass it on. And he says, however, right, ksheyesh latzadik hitbodedut umitpalel b'yechidi yachol laharim atzmo yoter. But if a tzaddik, sequesters themselves, right, and then in that environment, when you're alone, you can go really tremendously high places. And he doesn't deny that. Sometimes davening in shul is not as high, right, in terms of that sense of connection with God, unless you see the gathering itself as being that high and helping people to sing on key and in harmony, right, is a spiritual practice, which I think it is. So he says, even so, that's risky if you do it on your own, right? And he says, I just love this little one. So he says, but when you daven, in a kahal, right, you're not exposing yourself to criticism, or that in the same kind of way. The haraya, and the proof of this is she'af shehatzadik mitpalel umerim atzmo ba'olamot ha'elyonim, af al pi chen eno yochol lomar kedusha b'fachot be'asara. No matter how high you get when you're on your own, you can't say kedusha unless there's 9 other people there with you. Right? So you can't lose touch, right? You can't lose touch. I would say that our first effort to bring this kind of renewal to a synagogue, a newly forming synagogue just south of Vancouver, it basically failed, right? We can talk about that at length some other time. But in our second year in Vancouver, freed of weekly congregational work, we started a minyan in our living room, modeled after the Germantown Minyan in Philadelphia, with the crucial difference that we were a minyan led by a rabbinic couple. So at the beginning, Hanna and I did almost all the leading. This model made it possible to resolve issues where unanimity may not be possible, and thus prevented the deadlock that we had seen in other fully lay-led chavurot and minyanim. Our purpose was always, however, to broaden the leadership, to do our best to put ourselves out of work. We structured Psukei de Zimra so that even a person who could not read Hebrew could do a good job leading that part of the davening. The same was true for organizing the Torah discussion. Gradually, people would ask to learn the Nusach for Shachrit and the Trope for Torah reading. At least one of whom is present in the room. The test was to become, and the test finally was to discover whether the community could flourish even if we were not there. Suffice it to say that Reb Hannah Dresner's participation a few minutes ago and Reb Laura Duhan Kaplan's keynote speech yesterday, one of whom is the most, the Rabbi Emerita of Or Shalom and the current Rabbi of Or Shalom, and in fact, the next possible level of spiritual leadership for Shalom, Arik, is also here, right? So that's why I was so touched, Melissa, when you ran through the list of the people that, So their presence and participation attest to the continued vibrancy of Or Shalom and its continuing commitment to innovation, which of course comes with its own stresses. During those years, we partnered with friends, already introducing spiritual renewal in Eugene, in Portland, Seattle, and Bellingham, to create the Pacific Northwest Shavuot Retreat, which I think was either before the first Kala or very close to the first Kala. It was there in 1982 that the women of our extended community created the title of Eshet Chazon, Midwife of the Soul, with Reb Hanna, and Woman of Vision, Eshet Chazon, right, it was Eshet Chazon and Midwife of the Soul. That's you, that's right, sorry. So now I want to move to the Vav, which is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, and Hod. And listen to this teaching from the Maor Vashemesh. He quotes from the Talmud. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Lo matzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu kli machazik bracha Yisrael ela hashalom. Right? The vessel which can hold blessings for Israel is peace. That's the best one, right? Because it says, Hashem oz la'amo yitain, Hashem yivarech et amo v'shalom. The Maor Vashemesh goes on, Ki hashalom davar gadol hu kol kach. Peace is such a great thing. Shechas v'shalom ovdim avodah zara, v'yesh shalom gadol beinehem. Even if they are idol worshippers, but they are at peace with each other, lo yachol hasatan lekatreg alehem al averot shalahem. The Satan cannot come and bring a case against these people. Kevan sheyesh shalom beinehem, because there is peace among them. Azai divrei hasatan betelin v'lo yasu roshem klal. The Satan's words are useless. They will not accomplish anything. I really, really, really want us to hear that. Really want us to hear that the most important thing is that we be at peace with each other. Not that we agree with each other, but that we be at peace with each other, no matter what our judgment is of what the other person seems to be saying and how much we dislike it and how much we think it misses the point. The most important thing is to remain in a loving relationship with each other, that we have that. In 1995, Reb Zalman, already concerned, said the following, and I quote, Gewalt, Gewalt. We have lost much of the love we had for one another in the beginning of our work. I go back to the 60s and see how glad we were that we had each other. Today I feel turf wars being barely avoided, a positioning for fame and funds and jaundiced eyes threatening ayin hara instead of ayin tova. We need to recover the spiritual intimacy we shared. If we don't want to be like a dysfunctional family, we have to strengthen the pleasure in each other's presence. We need to bring back fun to Jewish Renewal. We are getting too nervous, harsh, and defensive. Ad kan. Reb Zalman gave me a 2-part deployment and one condition. In order to take on being Olive's executive director, I had to raise the first 3 years of the total expenses for the position. Reb Zalman wanted me to become the editor of what he called his foundational documents and contributed an amount from his pocket for those 3 years. The first part of the deployment was to broaden Olive to include more different people. This has happened, and it comes with its own stresses, particularly as they manifest now with regard to Israel. The second I tell in this way. When I started, I observed that if I went to the 30 or 40 people whom others would identify as being part of the in-group, 90% of that leadership would say that they were in the out-group. So I asked everyone to let me run the show for a while in order to broaden the leadership. Those were the days when I saw myself as playing Magid to Reb Zalman's best, bringing people to the table, as it were. I promised everyone that when this process was self-sustaining, I would back out of the center of the leadership circle, take my place in the circumference with everyone else, which I believe I did. If we grant for a moment that there is such a thing as a tzaddik who lives life differently and serves as an accessible model, then what might that mean now? One possibility is a suggestion I made years ago at a pre-Kala session for the teachers. That is that we think of ourselves as aspiring Talmidei Chachamim rather than rabbis, teachers. The Maor Vashemesh from Parshat Lech Lecha. Umiderech hatzadikim ha'amitiyim lefashpesh tamid b'ma'asehem b'hachna'a yitera b'chol yom vayom yoter v'yoter. The fundamental characteristic of a tzaddik is an ongoing, never-ending cheshbon hanefesh, right? A searching of the soul. And so every day you can reach a slightly higher level, but you always assume that that's not very significant, and I need to do some more work, right? I need to get even higher. In learning from the Maor Vashemesh, I came to understand that tshuva is more than something I do to address specific behaviors that I wish to atone for. The essence of our Judaism is contained in Anochi Yud He Vav He, that there is an intelligence, a consciousness that infuses and guides the world. Lo Yiyelecha, but the command to not have other gods, is to recognize that behaviors in which we put our short-term needs ahead of our connection to the divine are not reflective of the truth we say we hold. And if so, then the name of our spiritual practice is teshuvah, a constant returning after falling away. It is not just a hope for the correction of specific behaviors, but a returning to our immersion in the divine. We fall away and we return. We fall away and we return. I suggest that the use of a Jewish spiritual practice of mitzvot and learning to undergird a way of living and of making value choices specifically for this new reality, namely a life with simple needs, saving up to buy quality goods that will be useful for many years, and taking seriously an effort to reduce our carbon footprints. This is what informs the halachic process, approaching the issues of our time using the lens of the mission we accepted at Sinai, our history of discussing current issues in such a way that they constitute a new link in an unbroken chain, and making the choices best suited for furthering our mission to do what we can to bring the Mashiach closer. Remember that Reb Zalman liked to cite the First Nations motto of thinking ahead 7 generations before doing something in the present. It would be good if we made the commitment to practice this awareness and be willing to weigh future consequences against our desires for satisfaction now. And before moving on to the last section, something I just found in Chidushei Harim, that's another sefer by the Gerer Rebbe, the one who wrote the Sfat Emet. And I found this. I just have to say thank you to Seth Fishman, who is not here, but is one of the really true Zalman scholars. And so every now and then I hear from him, like, have you ever found this somewhere? I'm trying to. So because of him, this text came to me. Chasid echad ne'emad bedelet chadro shel Rabbeinu. He beat befanav zaman harbe. He beat befanav zaman harbe. So one particular chassid positioned himself at the doorway of the Rebbe's room, the Gerer Rebbe's room, and stayed there for a very long time. Sha'aluhu Rabbeinu. So our rabbi, you see it again, by the way, they're not, the Gerer is being called Rabbeinu here. It's a term that we know. So Rabbeinu asked him, Madua ata omed sham umistakel? Why are you standing there and staring at me? Ana chasid. So the chassid answered, Ra'iti be'or ha'chayim hakadosh. Be'or ha'chayim is one of the, I think he's like an 18th century maybe commentator on Torah. Is that right? Yeah, but I mean, when is it? He's the early 18th century. Yep. So anyway, he says, I found this in the Or HaChaim, in Parshat Re'eh. So you can go look it up if you want. Anochi sheyabitu v'yistaklu alav az yashpia alehem bracha. If we look directly sort of towards God, then God will cause a bracha to come to us. Lachein barur sheyesh bracha behistaklut bifnei hatzadik. So it's obvious then that looking at the tzaddik would be looking at God, and that would be a good way to stimulate a bracha. Heshivo Rabbeinu. So the Gerer replied, Halo katuv, is it not also written, Va'amech kulam tzadikim, right? Which is, I think, the quote that's put at the end of every chapter of Pirkei Avot when you study it. Or the beginning, I don't remember. But anyway, one of those two. He says, so it says that, right? Va'amech kulam tzadikim. V'gam ata tzadik. So you also are a tzaddik. Az mutav shetistakel letoch atzmecha. Better you should stare into yourself. Right? The last hay, Malchut. Having spent my first hay and the Vav being an administrator and community facilitator, which would have made both my father and my Rutgers Hillel director, Rabbi Julius Funk of blessed memory, very happy, it was time to focus on the next steps, 2 planned and 1 not planned. In the planned category, I played several roles in the AOP during this phase. While they were all meaningful, my most treasured was the teaching of a senior student's Halakha course. Reb Zalman had worried that people would leave our program without a knowledge of what he meant by paradigm shift, integral Halakha, and backwards compatibility. I promised him that I would do what I could to relieve his worry by offering a course in the Halakhic method, culminating in a tshuva that each student would write. And by the way, I still have a voice message he left me saying, yeah, I want people to know that this is how I feel. I was going to try and play it, but I couldn't figure out how to make the link. This exercise provided an opportunity for students to engage contemporary questions in a language that would be understood, if not always agreed with. And I will add that the experience was transformational for many of my students. I will admit here that this role fell to me largely because no one else wanted it, and I had become excited by the halachic process as I witnessed it during my first experience at the Shalom Hartman Institute. And by the way, I am still indebted to my chavruta at the Institute, Debbie Weissman, who worked with me to arrive at a new level of love and appreciation for Israel, coming as I do from a non-Zionist family. In addition, this led to the formation of the Integral Halacha Institute, a name given by Reb David Ingber, and which we housed within Olive Canada. And I want to be clear with you, we housed it in Olive Canada for various internal reasons. It is not an Olive Canada project, it is our project. It belongs to all of us. The result has been a three-pronged effort. One is the continuation of Olive's Reb Zalman Legacy Project with the digitizing of 200 plus separate teaching session cassettes, each of which I digitized. And you have to digitize it in real time, right? So it's a lot of time. Okay. And the digitizing of 200 plus separate teaching session cassettes, and now their availability online, as I trust you all know by now. And soon to come will be a collection of Reb Zalman's writings, mostly unpublished. The second is a slowly growing set of documents on various topics, which are now part of the Olive Resources Catalog, including a kuntris on renewing Ger Toshav and another on equalizing Gittin, with another on spiritual leadership currently in progress. Finally, we are now setting up a study program, actually over lunch today, leading to a smicha as dayan, something which Reb Zalman gave me 17 years ago. I promised him that I would expand this into a small group to start, and in a ceremony which was part of the smicha ceremony some years ago, I added Rabbi Sarleah Shlei, Simchat Daniel Bursin, and Hannah Dresner, each of whom brings a unique approach to the halachic process. Subsequently, the four of us gave the smicha to Rabbi Ra'anan Malik, who is here with us for the very first time, and I hope you have, if you haven't met him, you will, and Rabbi Oren Steinitz. This program can now serve as the continuation of the senior halacha program for those who want to learn how to analyze questions using a halachic language, how tshuvot are written, and how to create one of their own. The second plan is living rurally and especially growing food. For now, I will say only that gardening is an awesome experience, and not just because I can go out in the winter and bring in potatoes for Shabbat dinner and kale, beets, and carrots for winter salads. It is awesome in the old sense of the word, because it puts one face to face with the vagaries of climate in the best of times, as well as with climate change, with its unpredictable patterns in which that which grew well last year may not this year. This last section brings us into the present and we are experiencing now, and that's the unplanned one. So I'm asking two things from you right now. First, please indulge me and allow me to sing to you and for you the nigun I'm about to start. I'm sure many of you know it already, but I want you to listen to it deeply and nuanced. Then in another few minutes, when I finish talking, we would like to move directly and without pause into a closing tefillah, a three-part round. The words, I hope, will be up on the screen, but I think most of you will know them anyway, and we will divide us into three parts, each of which will sing one part of the round. Katuv b'Torah hakdosha, Anochi haster astir panai, Bayom hahu, bayom hahu. Rabbi Nachman masbir, v'afilu behastara, shebetoch hastara, bevadai gam sham nimtza Hashem yitbarach, v'afilu behastara, shebetoch hastara, bevadai gam sham nimtza Hashem yitbarach, ve'afilu behastara, shebetoch hastara, bevadai gam sham nimtza Hashem yitbarach. Ay, 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 gam me'achorei hadvarim akashim ha'ovrim alecha. Ani omed, ani omed, ani omed. Gam me'achorei hadvarim akashim ha'ovrim alecha. Ani omed. Ani omed, ani omed. So let's look at selections from the Torah on which this song is based and see how it might help us. Reb Nachman says, "V'tzarich lahamshich arichut yamim letoch hamalchut." You have to take length of days and insert it into malchut. Shelo tiyeh b'vchinot harabanut mekaberet et ba'ala. So you stay away from that way of being in authority which buries the people who are trying to be in that authority. Ki chol echad lefi bechinat hamalchut sheyesh lo hu bechinat tzofeh. Everyone on whom this characteristic of malchut is in that person becomes a scout, a lookout, someone who can see what's going on in the people and call their attention to what it is. But you have to do it in a way that they can hear it. And how do you do that? So by being busy in Torah, you can reach arichut yamim. I want to pause for a moment and ask, why does Reb Nachman prescribe more Torah study as a way of achieving arichut yamim? Isn't this just the standard prescription for everything? Right? Isn't it just a cop-out? So let's remember two things. One is that Reb Nachman never achieved arichut yamim in the literal sense of a long life. So he is asserting that even someone who is still young can access arichut yamim. And the way is through Torah. Second, what he means by Torah study is much more than opening a Tanakh or a Gemara. In his short life, remember that he experienced the loss of 4 of his 8 children. His wife, Sashia. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, from which he died at 37. Already a grandfather, by the way. He moved to Uman at the invitation and with the support of Maskilim after his house burned down, which, as you know, Hanna and I know firsthand what that's like. He knew the darkness. Yes. Thank you. Okay. He knew the darkness and yet continued to give Divrei Torah right to the end of his life. And Reb Nachman is far from being unique. I might suggest that reading the Eish Kodesh, the writings of the Piasetzner in the Warsaw Ghetto, translated, as at least Google says, in a nice readable translation by Hershey Warsh, who also had a long connection with Reb Zalman, and the magnificent scholarly work by Rabbi Nehemiah Poland, called The Holy Fire, in which he analyzes, describes what the theology of the Piasetzner seemed to be as the time in the Warsaw Ghetto kept going. And I think they can be meaningful for us to understand that, because it's very easy for us to let go of we lose our faith very quickly when we're under pressure. So we should go to the people who live that pressure. In addition, engaging in Torah also has the benefit of a pause. Sorry, I skipped a paragraph. I'd like to actually say it. Engaging in Torah study in its broadest sense, a person, regardless of chronological age, can experience Arichut Yamim through the teachings and experiences of those who came before us. After all, we are far from being the first generation to experience the feeling of abandonment and the real potential of being destroyed as a people, a possibility that also challenges our most fundamental beliefs about who we are and why we are. In addition, engaging in Torah also has the benefit of a pause, a consultation with the past, to take some time to look for similarities and differences and to formulate our responses carefully and slowly. I know this goes against the grain of these days, even for me, and I think Rabbi Karen displayed it last night with what's the turnaround time on emails, right? A big turnaround time is 2 minutes. And that's very, it's important because we who are reading lists know how fast responses happen and what that does, what happens when that happens, when it's too fast. So I know that this goes against the grain these days, even for me, with the temptation to respond quickly, to skim rather than read, to act on unquestioned assumptions, to fail to ask questions, and asking questions is at the very heart of what it means to engage in Torah. Reb Nachman goes on to say, Ki yesh shnei hastarot. There are two levels, two kinds of hiddenness. When the Holy One is hidden in one layer, it is still possible to find God, to know that God is there. Even before the 7th of October, we were living in a time of hastara. War in Ukraine, millions of people becoming refugees from wars and climate in Darfur, Myanmar, China, wildfires and flooding that have led to hundreds, if not thousands, of climate refugees in my home province of British Columbia. We're not talking about the third world here, right? Not counting all those in Alberta, the Northwest Territories, the northern parts of the Prairie provinces, essentially all of Canada. We continue to lose parts of the Amazon. Mexican forests are being cut down so that we can have more avocados. The increasing disparity in the distribution of wealth. And the list is almost endless, even without mentioning climate change-caused emergencies in the United States. And climate change has not taken a break while we decide to have all the wars we think we need to have. The verse on which the Nigun and this Torah is based doubles the word for hiddenness. V'anochi haster astir panai, right? Which you don't find in most of the recordings, which is why in your handout I have my favorite one where Karduner does use both verbs. Aval ke Hashem yitbarach nistar b'hastara tocha hastara. Dahainu shehahastara be'atzma nisteret mimenu. When God hides in a hastara that was inside a hastara. So if the hastara is hiding the hastara, right? Then you don't know that God is hidden there. It's hard to find out there. Va'azai bevadai eino yachol limtso oto yitbarach. And so you can't find God there, right? Because you don't see it, because you don't see that it's God doing this. For us, the Jewish people, the 7th of October initiated a hastara b'toch hastara. As a New York Times columnist observed, this horrible moment of the random killing of Jews, who also included Asian workers, Bedouins, and Palestinians, the horrible brutality of the violence against women, children, and elders, of rape and dismemberment, opened in us those genetic memories we all have of the violence committed against us over the centuries. Polls already show a disturbing number of PTSD symptoms among Israelis, and as I have just learned, among these people who are living on this side. And while we have not personally been subject to the indiscriminate brutality as have our Israeli relatives, there has been enough crossing of the line between opposition to a government and a desire to hold accountable the rest of that government's extended family, wherever we are. In other words, a crossing into anti-Semitism. And all of this against the background of the widespread protests that had already been happening in Israel, our deep concerns for our Palestinian cousins, our near despair as a peace which seems so obviously in the best interest of both Israelis and Palestinians is elusive to the point of seeming impossible to achieve. We have felt alone on all sides of the question. We have exposed our fears on all sides of the question. We have in our pain lashed out at those we love, our extended Jewish Renewal Chevra. We have been trapped by binary thinking, us against them, right versus wrong. Many of us have succumbed to the hastara betocha hastara and no longer even remember the God to whom we love to offer prayer and learning. Aval be'emet, Reb Nachman says, afilu b'chol ha'hastarot, v'afilu b'ha'hastara shebetocha hastara, bevadai gam sham melubash Hashem yitbarach, ki bevadai ein shum davar, shelo yiyeh bo chiyut Hashem yitbarach. Even in the depths of these hastarot, even in the hastara which is within the hastara, the Holy One is still clothed there, right? Because there is nothing that can exist outside of the divine energy force. I don't know how it's been for you, but during some of the meditations over the weekend, when we were doing these expansive meditations, in my mind, one of the pictures I saw was Gaza. Right? I saw the massacres, I saw Gaza. And those had to be somehow, I didn't try to make sense of them, but they were there, and I didn't want them not to be there. I didn't want to say, like I've often said to people, we're about to say the Shema, right? Ya Echad. Think of the one thing that you think is not in the Echad and bring it in, right? It's very, very hard to do that now, but increasingly necessary. Lately, I've been wrestling with Hashgacha Pratit. I think it started during the pandemic when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, allowing the Supreme Court to move further to the right. In Canada, by the way, Supreme Court justices have fixed terms. Of course, lately it's been focused on Israel, but for years now I've had the feeling that no matter what all of us who love peace, seek peace, and work to bring peace, that doesn't seem to be making much of a difference. As an aging boomer, I was certain that by this time in my life we would be living environmentally sensitive lives in a world of peaceful cooperation. Like the difficulty in finding out exactly how quantum and Newtonian mechanics connect to one another, I've been having difficulty making sense of the feeling that my own life, the small one, has been guided, while the larger world seems increasingly chaotic and in denial. If Reb Nachman's advice is relevant, then we need to be probing the hastara betocha hastara for the hidden letters of Torah and presence of the divine, so that the hastara will become da'at, and from da'at we can access arichut yamim, a perspective from the world of Bria, in addition to those of Asiya and Yetzirah. In doing so, we will be able to have our discussions in the spirit which Reb Nachman identified in the Torah of the Void. Controversy, if for the sake of heaven, creates worlds. Binary thinking, either or, on the other hand, creates confusion and makes problems insoluble. Remember what I said at the beginning from the Ma'or Vashemesh. The most important thing is that we be at peace with each other, even if some of us think that others are literally practicing Avodah Zarah. God cares less about that than that we respect and care for one another. As Reb Nachman also said, you must be strong and not despair, God forbid, even if what will happen happens. The main thing is to be in joy always. Be happy with what is possible, even through foolishness, making yourself look like a fool and doing foolish things, and laughing or jumping and dancing in order to become joyful, which is a great thing. Kaveh Eliyah, Chazak v'yametz libecha. 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 Kaveh Eliyah,
Chazak v'yametz libecha. Kaveh Eliyah,
Chazak v'yametz libecha.
Kaveh Eliyah,
Chazak v'yametz libecha. chazak v'yametz libecha. Be strong. Turn yourselves towards God. Keep your souls strong and loving. Thank you all so much.
חי יכול ויום יכול חי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן.
אמן. יש מרבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה.
ויש מרבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה ולעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ועלמה ואמרו אמן על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל כל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי הון כל העוסקים באורייתא דביאתרא קדישא הדין וכל אתר ואתר יהי להון ולכון שלמה רבה מן שמאי אחינה וחיסדא ורחמים וחי נריך למזונה רוויחי ופורקנה מן קדם עוון ושמיה ורע ואמרו אמן יהי שלמה רבה מן שמאי וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
Thank you to Rabbi Elise Seidner Joseph for making this beautiful session possible.